Chapter 1. Cold Reason. The whiskey glass, smudged with a decade of his fingerprints, was a solid thing. That was the problem. Dr. Thomas Reed lifted it, and the ice, a single cloudy cube from a tray he'd meant to clean last week, clinked a frail protest. Outside his office window, the world had dissolved into a roaring white static. The snowstorm wasn't falling, it was being hurled, horizontal and furious against the clapboard siding of the Reed Animal Clinic. It was a sound like a million grains of sand being blasted against the world, a constant hungry hiss that had long since swallowed the distant hum of the Glen Highway. Anchorage was out there somewhere, but here, on the ragged fringe of Muldoon Road, it was just Thomas. A bottle of Gilbey's gin, the cheap stuff because the good stuff made the memories too clear, and the ghosts he kept in a locked desk drawer alongside his .38 revolver. He took a sip, letting the juniper burn cut through the lingering smells of the clinic, the pine-scented disinfectant that never quite masked the underlying notes of fear piss, wet dog fur, and the coppery tang of old blood. The power flickered. The fluorescent tube above his desk stuttered, casting a dying man's pallor over the framed photos. Him and Claire on their wedding day, both younger and softer. Him and a beaming, gap-toothed Ellie holding a kitten. The light steadied, buzzing like an angry insect. It was the third time tonight. The backup generator was a cantankerous old diesel thing out back. He'd have to brave the storm to kick it if this went on. A sound cut through the white noise. Not the wind. Bang, bang, bang. A fist, meaty and insistent, hammering on the clinic's front door. Thomas closed his eyes. It was past 10, no appointment. In this weather, it was either a genuine emergency or a special kind of Alaskan crazy. He set the glass down with a soft thud on the green blotter, the sound absorbed by the oppressive silence of the kennels. That was the other thing, the dogs. 5 of them, boarders waiting out the storm with their owners gone to Juneau or Fairbanks. They should have been a riot of barking at the intrusion. Instead, nothing. A perfect, unsettling void of sound. Thomas had checked on them an hour ago. Each one, the geriatric Labrador, the yappy Pomeranian mix, the 2 mutts, the anxious shepherd, was sitting or standing perfectly still in their run. Not sleeping, not agitated. They were all oriented toward the main door, ears pricked, eyes unblinking, as if waiting. It had chilled him more than the draft seeping under the door. Bang, bang, bang. "All right, goddammit," Thomas muttered. His voice was gravelly from disuse and gin. He shuffled out of the office, through the dim reception area with its faded posters of smiling cats and the smell of yesterday's coffee. He didn't bother with the peephole. He just unlocked the deadbolt and hauled the door inward against the wind. A wall of frozen air hit him. It carried with it the smell of spruce needles, gasoline, and something else, a dry mineral scent, like crushed rock and old ice. A man stood silhouetted in the blizzard's fury, a hulking shape in a snow-caked parka with a fur-trimmed hood. Over his shoulder was a slumped form wrapped in a dark wool blanket. "Doc," the man grunted, his voice muffled. "Need you." "Get in before we lose all the heat," Thomas said, stepping back. The hunter, he had to be a hunter with that build and that parka, lumbered in. He kicked snowmelt and road grit onto the linoleum. He shoved the door shut, cutting off the roar to a muted, insistent whine. He lowered his bundle gently to the floor. It was a Siberian husky. Its classic gray and white coat was matted with snow and something dark that might have been mud. Its eyes were open, a pale, intelligent blue. They tracked Thomas calmly. "Found him out past Eklutna," the hunter said, not meeting Thomas's eye. He was a big man, maybe 50, with a beard frosted with ice. His name was Carl, Thomas recalled vaguely. Came in once a year for rabies shots for his sled team. Just standing in a clearing. No pack, no collar. Didn't run, just looked at me. Thomas knelt, his knees popping. He reached out, the professional automaton taking over. The dog's fur was cold, not just chilled from the storm cold, but a profound, deep cold that seeped into Thomas's fingertips. He pressed his fingers to the femoral artery. Nothing. No pulse. He leaned in, his ear against the rib cage. Silence. No breath, no heartbeat. Yet the dog's chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. Its eyes blinked. "He's breathing," Carl stated, a strange flatness in his tone. "He has no heartbeat," Thomas said, standing up. The gin fuzz in his head was gone, replaced by a sharp clinical alarm. "His body temp it's ambient, feels like freezing." "He walked to the truck," Carl said, still staring at the dog. "Got in the back, just sat." The eerie silence from the kennels felt heavier now, a pressure in the room. Thomas fetched a digital thermometer. The reading flashed almost immediately, 0.0 degrees Celsius. He tried an ear thermometer, then a rectal. All the same, 0.0, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature of ice. "This is impossible," Thomas whispered. "A living, metabolizing mammal cannot have a core temperature of freezing and be conscious, let alone ambulatory. Hypothermia victims were comatose long before this. I need an X-ray. Now!" He moved quickly, his exhaustion buried under a surge of adrenaline. He and Carl lifted the husky. It was surprisingly light, its body oddly rigid yet pliant, onto the stainless steel table in the treatment room. The dog didn't struggle. It lay there, panting softly, its tongue lolling. No steam rose from its mouth. The X-ray machine hummed to life. Thomas positioned the plate, donned his lead apron, and took the shot. The developer whirred. He pulled the still damp film from the processor and clipped it to the light box. He expected to see the ghostly gray architecture of ribs, spine, the shadowy shapes of organs. What he saw made his breath catch. There was a dense, conglomerate mass in the abdominal cavity. It wasn't the shape of any normal organ, not a liver, not a stomach filled with food. It was a perfect, tangled sphere of intense whiteness, like a ball of knotted wires or worms. It seemed to pulse slightly, a nebulous, shifting density. Around it, the outlines of other organs were faint, shrunken, as if atrophied or displaced, and the heart shadow was utterly absent. "Son of a bitch," Thomas breathed. He'd seen this before, once, in a police briefing. Drug mules, condoms filled with heroin or meth swallowed by desperate people or animals. Sometimes they ruptured. This must be it. Some new, super-concentrated form packed into a dog. It explained the low metabolism, the bizarre vitals. It explained the hunter's weird demeanor. He was lying. This was a drop gone wrong. Anger, hot and familiar, washed over him. He was being used, again. "You expect me to believe you just found him?" Thomas snapped, turning to Carl. "What's in him, Carl? What did you make him carry?" Carl just looked at him. His eyes, a watery blue, seemed strangely depthless in the fluorescent light. "You have to take it out, Doc." "Oh, I'm going to take it out," Thomas said, the gin-fueled cynicism roaring back. He prepped for surgery with brutal efficiency. Scalpel, clamps, sutures, the portable warmer blowing hot air over the table, though the dog showed no sign of shivering. He administered a ketamine injection out of habit, though he doubted it would have any effect. It didn't. The dog's breathing didn't change. "Hold him," Thomas ordered, gloving up. Carl moved to the head of the table, his large hands resting on the dog's neck and shoulders. His touch seemed more of a ritual than a restraint. Thomas took the scalpel. The cold, sterile light gleamed on the steel. He made the incision, a clean line down the midline. There was barely any blood. A thin, clear, viscous fluid welled up, smelling of ozone and wet stone. He used retractors to pull back the skin and muscle. The body cavity was wrong. It was empty of the familiar, glistening, warm landscape of life. There was no liver, the color of old wine, no slick, coiled intestines, no stomach, no spleen, just a smooth, grayish membrane lining the ribs. And in the center, occupying the space where everything should have been, was the mass. It wasn't a packet. It was a nest, a pulsating, living knot of pale, segmented worms, each as thick as his finger and the translucent white of glacial ice. They writhed in a perfect, hideous synchrony, a single entity of countless parts. They were packed so tightly they made a soft, wet, crunching sound as they moved against each other, a sound like walking on frozen gravel. And they were cold. A visible, shimmering coldness radiated from them, making the air above the incision waver. Thomas recoiled, a gag rising in his throat. This wasn't drugs. This was something else, something that had replaced the dog. A loud metallic clunk echoed from the front. Thomas jerked his head up. Carl was gone from the table. He was at the treatment room door, sliding the heavy security bolt home, locking them in. "What are you doing?" Thomas demanded, his voice trembling. Carl turned. He moved with a stiff, deliberate economy. He reached up and slowly pushed back his hood, then unzipped his parka. Beneath it, his flannel shirt was stained dark around the collar. Not with mud, with something dried and black. With a terrible, slow deliberation, he pulled the collar down. A jagged, gaping wound crossed his throat, deep enough to show the pale glint of cervical vertebrae. The edges were frostbitten, black and necrotic. No blood flowed. "Don't let it out, Doc," Carl said. His voice was a dry rasp that didn't seem to come from the ruined throat. The lips didn't move in sync. It was a bad ventriloquist act performed by a corpse. "It is only learning to be a dog. It needs to practice on the warm things, on the thinking things." On the table, the husky's body shuddered. Not a seizure, but a violent contraction. The incision ripped wider with a sound like tearing canvas. The ball of icy worms uncoiled. It exploded outward in a lascivious, wriggling geyser, dozens, hundreds of them, spilling over the stainless steel, hitting the floor with soft, wet taps. They moved with a terrifying, unified purpose, flowing like a single liquid organism toward Thomas. He screamed. He stumbled back, knocking over the instrument tray. The worms flowed around it, over it. He saw one rear up, its blind, tapered end questing in the air, sensing his heat. He ran, not to the locked treatment room door, but to the back, to the walk-in freezer where he stored vaccines and specimens. It was a solid steel door with a heavy latch. The cold. They were cold. Maybe the cold would deter them. Maybe they'd be inert. He reached it, yanked the handle, and threw himself inside, slamming the door shut behind him. The latch engaged with a solid final funk. Darkness, and a deep humming cold that seeped through his scrubs instantly. He fumbled for the interior light switch. A single caged bulb flicked on, illuminating the small sterile space lined with shelves. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic thudding of his own heart and his ragged, steaming breaths. He was safe. The cold was his ally. He leaned against the door, sliding down to sit on the floor, his head in his hands. The image of the worms, of Carl's dead throat, burned behind his eyelids. Then, a sound. A soft electrical buzz from the intercom speaker mounted high in the corner of the freezer, a system he used to communicate with the front when his hands were full. It had never worked quite right. It buzzed again, then crackled to life. Not with static, with perfect, terrifying clarity. It was a young girl's voice, sweet, concerned, the voice he heard on rare, expensive, long-distance calls to Seattle. "Daddy?" said Ellie's voice, clear as if she were standing beside him. "Let Jack in. Our dog is back, and he's scratching at the door." A pause. In the silence, Thomas thought he could hear it, a faint rhythmic scritch, scritch, scritch against the other side of the steel freezer door. Ellie's voice came again, cheerful and final. "He's so cold."
Chapter 2. White Noise. Detective Sarah Miller's coffee had gone cold 40 minutes ago. It sat on the chipped Formica desk in the Pinewood Cove precinct, a viscous oil-slicked circle in a mug that read, "World's Okayest Cop." The cold wasn't just in the cup, it was in the air. It seeped through the cinder-block walls of the station, a damp, marrow-deep chill that the wheeling, groaning furnace in the basement fought with dwindling conviction. Outside the reinforced window, Maine had vanished. The blizzard was a white wall, a silent screaming void that had swallowed the pines, the road, the sky. It had cut them off from Bangor, from Augusta, from the rest of a world that suddenly felt like a dream. The station was a tomb of static. Walkie-talkies on charging cradles hissed and popped. Their green indicator lights flickered like corpse candles. The police band scanners spat bursts of distortion. If Sarah strained her ears, they resolved into something that sounded less like radio skip and more like the slow, deep crackle of ancient ice, or the sibilant, consonantless whisper of a language spoken through a mouthful of snow. She'd turned the volume down twice. It didn't help. The sound was in the wires, in the bones of the building. Her focus was on the photographs pinned to the corkboard. Crime scene photos from the Henderson farmhouse, 3 miles out on the old Ridge Road. A family of 4, Martin, Joan, and their 2 teenagers, found at their dinner table, pot roast congealed on the plates. They were all leaning back in their chairs, faces tilted toward the ceiling. Their expressions were identical, blissful, ecstatic smiles. The corners of their mouths stretched wide in a rictus of pure joy. And where their eyes should have been were smooth, unbroken patches of skin, as if the orbits had never formed. No blood, no signs of struggle, just vacancy, and that terrible smiling peace. The sole witness shivered in the holding cell 10 feet away, wrapped in a scratchy precinct-issue blanket. Liam Henderson was 10 years old. He'd been found by a snowplow driver wandering barefoot down the center of Route 9. Clad only in pajamas, his skin so cold the driver thought he was a ghost. The boy hadn't cried. He hadn't asked for his parents. He just stared with wide, unblinking blue eyes. Sarah took a deep breath. The air tasted of stale cigarette smoke, despite the ban, burnt coffee, and the underlying, ever-present scent of industrial cleaner and despair. She was a rationalist. She built cases on evidence, on fiber, on footprint, on the cold, hard logic of motive and opportunity. The things on that board defied that logic. They curdled it. She picked up her notebook and a fresh tape recorder, walking over to the open cell door. The boy looked up. His face was pale, freckled, calm. "Liam, I'm Detective Miller. Can I ask you a few more questions?" The boy nodded. His voice, when it came, was clear and disturbingly flat. "They didn't die, you know." "What do you mean, Liam?" "Mom and Dad, and Jess and Billy. They didn't die." He looked past her, toward the wall where the radio static whispered. "They went into the sound, the beautiful quiet sound behind the cold. They're happier there. Their eyes were in the way. They had to see the cold to go into it." A shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature skittered down Sarah's spine. "What sound, Liam?" "The white noise," the boy said. A faint answering smile touched his lips. It was an echo of the grins on the photographs. "It sings in the wires, in the frost. It's teaching us to be quiet." From the front desk, Officer Danvers, a 20-year veteran with the expression of a tired bloodhound, called out, "Miller, evidence bag from the scene just came up from the locker." It was a clear plastic bag containing the personal effects found on the Hendersons: wallets, a set of keys, a woman's locket, and a smartphone. A sleek new iPhone, its screen dark. Sarah took the bag, laying it on the desk beside her cold coffee. The phone was listed as found on kitchen counter, battery depleted. As she scanned the evidence log, a sound ripped through the whispery static of the station. "Bring, bring."
Loud, piercing, and utterly mundane, the ringtone of an iPhone. It was coming from inside the sealed evidence bag. Sarah stared. The phone's screen remained black, dead. No glow, no indicator light. Yet it rang with a vibrant electronic trill that clashed horribly with the analog hiss of the radios. "Don't answer it," Liam said softly. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking toward the kennel at the back of the open-plan station, where Canine Officer Benji's partner, a German shepherd named Rex, was usually housed. The phone rang a third time, then fell silent. The silence that followed was worse. It was a held breath. Then, a new sound, a slow dragging metallic scrape. Sarah turned. Rex was out of his kennel. The latch, which required a human thumb to depress, hung open. The shepherd stood in the middle of the common area. But he wasn't on all fours. He was standing, perfectly upright on his hind legs. His posture was a grotesque parody of a human's. His spine was curved unnaturally. His forepaws, no, his hands, hung limp at his sides for a moment. His head was tilted, ears flat. The intelligence in his brown eyes was gone, replaced by a flat, crystalline emptiness like chips of dirty ice. "Benji," Sarah breathed, looking for the dog's handler. Benji was slumped at his desk, head in his hands, unmoving. Rex took a step. It was a jerky, stilted motion. His hips swayed, his claws clicking on the linoleum. He moved toward Liam's cell. With a fluid, horrifyingly deliberate motion, he lifted one front paw. He pressed it against the simple push-button lock on the cell door. The pad of his paw covered the numbers. He pressed one, a beep, then another. He wasn't punching them at random. He was using a deliberate sequence, the code to all the holding cells. 0913, the precinct's founding month and year. The lock buzzed and clicked open. Liam stood up, letting the blanket fall. He was smiling fully now, that same blissful Henderson smile. "They are here," he whispered. Sarah was on her feet, her hand on her service Glock. "Rex, down! Down now!" The dog turned its head toward her. The movement was too smooth, too controlled for an animal. It ignored her. It used its snout to nudge the cell door fully open. The overhead lights chose that moment to die. They didn't flicker, they simply went out, plunging the station into a deep, snow-muted twilight. Emergency battery packs kicked in with a thump, powering a few low-wattage red lights near the exits and the bank of backup monitors at the dispatch desk. The monitors flickered to life, showing grainy black and white feeds from the exterior security cameras. Sarah's blood turned to slush in her veins. The snow was still falling, but now the clearing around the small station was filled with shapes. Dozens of them, hundreds. Deer, their coats plastered with ice, stood shoulder to shoulder with ragged foxes. A massive bull moose, its antlers crusted white, stood like a sentinel. Among them, darker shapes, wolves, their eyes gleaming with a faint reflective blue in the camera's night vision. They formed a perfect concentric circle around the building, facing inward, not moving, not foraging, just staring. Then, as one, they moved. They lowered their heads, and they began to beat them against the walls of the station. It wasn't a frantic, wild attack. It was a slow, measured, rhythmic thud. 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 The sound was a deep, resonant drumming through the cinder blocks, a solid, fleshy bone and antler impact that shook the floor under Sarah's feet. Thud. 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 A sickening, relentless metronome. Danvers yelled, rushing to the window, his sidearm drawn, his breath plumed in the suddenly Arctic air. Sarah looked at the interior walls. A pattern was spreading across the beige paint, crawling out from the corners and the outlets. It wasn't ordinary frost. It was a delicate feathering lattice of ice. It branched and subdivided exactly like a circulatory system, thick trunk-like veins that sprouted smaller arterioles and capillaries, a perfect frozen anatomy chart etching itself across the station. It pulsed with a faint internal light, a slow blue-white rhythm that matched the beating of the heads outside. Thud, thud, thud. Rationality shattered, procedure evaporated. This was a siege by a frozen, silent madness. Sarah stumbled to the dispatch radio, her fingers numb. She keyed the mic. "Central, this is Pinewood Cove Precinct, code 999. Officer under siege. Require immediate tactical backup. Do you copy? The woods, the animals, for God's sake, send everyone." The radio hissed, then cleared. The white noise subsided. A voice came through, calm, male, thick with a fatigue so profound it was almost tangible. "The cold isn't outside, Sarah." Sarah froze. The voice wasn't from Central. It was hollow, strained, a man on the edge. "Who is this?" she demanded. "It's already in your lungs," the voice continued, with a dreadful clinical certainty. It was the voice of Dr. Thomas Reed, thousands of miles and a world away, speaking from a walk-in freezer in Alaska. "You breathe it. It learns the shape of your warmth. It's learning to be you." A violent, racking cough exploded from Sarah's chest. It bent her double. It wasn't a tickle. It was a convulsion, a feeling of something solid and wrong detaching deep in her bronchial tree. She clutched the metal dispatch table, her vision swimming. She coughed again, a wet, tearing sound. Something landed on the scratched metal surface with a soft, wet tap. She stared, gagging. Her breath came in ragged, steaming gasps. It writhed there, pale and glistening under the red emergency light, a segmented worm, the translucent white of river ice, about 4 inches long. It coiled and uncoiled with a languid, alien grace, its blind end questing toward the warmth of her hand. It pulsed with the same slow blue rhythm as the frost veins on the wall. Sarah stared at the thing that had just come from inside her. The last fragment of her rational world crumbled to dust, and all that was left was the cold, the whispering static, and the relentless, unifying thud from outside. Chapter 3. The House That Frost Built. The silence at Silent Peak was not an absence of sound, it was a presence, a heavy woolen blanket of quiet that swallowed the howl of the Wyoming wind, the crunch of Special Agent Arthur Blackwood's boots on the permafrost, even the frantic thud of his own heart. It was the silence of a held breath, of a world listening back. The weather station, a squat utilitarian dome of corrugated steel and reinforced glass, hunched against the mountain's spine like a steel tick. It was the last known location of the NOAA research team. Their final transmission 3 weeks prior had been a burst of static containing a single clear phrase: "The white is not empty, it is full of teeth." Arthur had read the files from Alaska, a missing vet, a hunter found with his throat frozen open. He'd watched the footage from Maine, the head tourniquet precinct, the officer found smiling and eyeless, a puddle of meltwater and something wriggling at her feet, a pattern of cold and madness spreading like frost on a window pane, converging here at the belly button of the continent. He was the last thread of a rational world pulling itself taut before snapping. He bypassed the locked outer hatch with a hydraulic ram. The metal screamed, a profanity in the perfect quiet. The door swung inward. The smell hit him first, a physical wave that made him gag and stumble back, fumbling for his respirator. It wasn't the sterile metallic scent of a lab. It was the thick, cloying, humid stench of a slaughterhouse in high summer. Raw meat, spoiled viscera, and underneath the sweet, nauseating perfume of blooming rot. Heat rolled out, a swampy, biological warmth that fogged his goggles. He stepped inside. His standard-issue flashlight cut a trembling beam through the gloom. The station was wrong. It was alive, not metaphorically, biologically. The walls, once beige plasterboard, were now a mottled, pulsating surface of deep burgundy and bruised purple flesh, veined with networks of phosphorescent blue ice that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light. The floor beneath his boots was slightly springy, tacky, like walking on a giant's tongue. The ceiling dripped a clear, viscous fluid that smelled of ammonia and ozone, but it was the details that broke his mind. What he had taken from the doorway to be a strange black mold crawling across every surface was, up close, composed of millions upon millions of tiny, perfectly preserved fly wings, each one dusted with a microscopic rime of frost, arranged in swirling fractal patterns. And the mirrors, every reflective surface.
The monitor screens, the glass over a gauge, a small hand mirror on a desk, was shattered. Not broken in a rage, but seemingly from within, as if something behind the glass had pressed too hard, wanting out. His radio, clipped to his vest, emitted only a soft, warm hiss, like steam escaping a kettle. No static, no voices, just a patient, listening silence. He found the logbook on a desk that had partially fused with the fleshy wall. The entries started normally: barometric readings, ice core samples, notes on local fauna. The change was gradual. November 12th, persistent white noise on all frequencies. Wolves observed standing bipedal near tree line, dismissed as mass hysteria or prank. November 18th, core sample 7B contains unidentified organic matter, multicellular, but no DNA structure we can recognize. It seems to use crystalline ice as both skeleton and nervous system. It's not in the permafrost. The permafrost is its exoskeleton. November 25th, Henderson in Maine has stopped responding. The signal is getting stronger. It sings in the cold. It doesn't want to kill us. It wants to incorporate us, to teach us how to survive the long winter. The final entry, scrawled in a shaky, ecstatic hand, read, "We realized why the animals change. They aren't sick. They are evolving to survive the new climate. The true climate, the one that comes after the fire goes out. We must join them. We must make ourselves quiet and cold and still. We go to the lab to meet the teacher." Arthur's mouth was desert dry. He drew his sidearm, the weight of cold steel, the only familiar thing in the universe. The door to the lab was at the end of the short hall. It was organic now, a sphincter of intertwined muscle and glistening rime. It dilated at his approach with a wet, sucking sound. The lab was a chapel of horror. In the center, on a table that was now a mound of fused flesh and wire, lay a massive gray wolf. Tubes and wires, some metallic, some glistening and organic, ran from its body into the walls and floor. Its chest did not rise or fall. Its fur was matted with the same clear fluid. This was patient zero, the first conduit. Arthur's training evaporated. There was no procedure for this, only purification. He shrugged off his pack, pulling out the 2-gallon cans of gasoline he'd brought as a precaution. He began schlossing it around the room, the acrid smell of petrol cutting through the rot. He drenched the wolf, the tables, the pulsing walls. He pulled a lighter from his pocket. The wolf's eyes snapped open. They were not animal eyes. They were deep crystalline wells of blue-white light, containing swirling galaxies of frost. Its jaws parted, not in a snarl, but in a perfect mimicry of human speech. The voice that emerged was a familiar one, warm with a Brooklyn accent, belonging to his partner, Marco Ricci, who had died in a warehouse fire 2 years ago. "Artie," the wolf said with Marco's affectionate rasp, "don't. You're thinking like a mammal, like a brief, warm thing." Arthur froze, the lighter trembling in his hand. "It's not an invasion," the wolf Marco continued, its tongue lolling in a grotesque parody of a smile. "It's a mercy. A metaphysical ice age is coming, one that will last 100,000 years.
The fire thinkers, the warm-blooded screamers, you'll all go extinct. This learns what you are. It preserves the pattern, the quiet, cold, eternal pattern. It's not death, Artie. It's curation. What are you? Arthur whispered. The first whisper of the long winter, it said, and this station is its nursery. The walls contracted. A deep groaning vibrato shook the room, the fleshy surfaces rippled, and faces began to press outward from the plaster skin, the stretched, serene faces of the missing scientists, their features blurred as if seen through ice, their mouths moved in unison, a chorus of sighs and whispers that coalesced into words. Outside is death, Arthur. Inside is eternity. Be still, be cold, join the quiet frequency. Arthur flicked the lighter. It sparked. He threw it. The gasoline ignited with a whump that sent a blast of searing heat through the humid room. The wolf thing did not scream. It sighed, a sound of profound relief as its fur ignited. The walls recoiled, the faces shrieking in a soundless agony, the ice veins sizzling and popping. Arthur turned and ran, scrambling back down the throbbing hallway toward the hatch. The fire spread behind him with unnatural speed, feeding on the biological matter. But the station was fighting back, secreting a thick, clear gel that smothered the flames even as they spread. The entrance was just ahead. He could see the gray daylight. Then the wall of flesh in front of the hatch moved. It flowed like wet clay, thickening, sealing the exit with a finality that was both physical and spiritual. A final smiling face, the station's head researcher, Dr. Aris, her lips forming the words, "Stay, be perfected." Trapped. The fire was behind him, the living wall before him. The heat was becoming unbearable, the air thick with the smell of burning meat and petrol. He stumbled back into the main room, away from the spreading flames. His eyes fell on the radio transmitter, a bulky, old-fashioned piece of equipment that seemed less corrupted than the rest, its dials still brass and glass, a final thread to the outside. He collapsed into the chair, its leather seat now soft and spongy. He powered on the unit. A weak light glowed. He grabbed the microphone, its mesh cold against his lips. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday!" he rasped, his voice raw with smoke and terror. "This is Special Agent Arthur Blackwood, FBI, at Silent Peak Station. The contagion is not viral. Repeat, not viral. It is a consciousness, a cold, silent consciousness in the environment itself. It absorbs, it mimics, it curates. It is preparing the biosphere for an extinction-level event. You must—" A cough racked him, a deep, convulsive spasm that felt like something unspooling in his chest. His vision blurred. The warm, humid air felt suddenly sharp in his lungs, like breathing ground glass. "You must ignite the permafrost," he gasped, fighting the rising pressure in his throat, in his sinuses, behind his eyes. "Burn it all. Don't listen to the quiet. Don't trust the animals when they get too still." His voice caught. It cracked, not with emotion, but physically, like ice on a pond. He tried to speak again. What came out was not human speech. It started as a low subsonic rumble that vibrated the microphone, then rose into a piercing ultrasonic shriek before settling into a long, reverberating polyphonic howl. It was the sound of a blizzard given voice, the groan of shifting glaciers, the collective sigh of a forest freezing solid. It contained no words, only the pure, terrible essence of the cold mind. The howl built, crescendoed, and then was abruptly cut off. The transmission dissolved into a perfect, empty white noise static.
You know, we spend our lives wrapped in this thin little envelope of warmth, 72 degrees Fahrenheit, central heating, wool socks. We think of the cold as an absence, an emptiness, a nothingness waiting for our heat to fill it. We are wrong. I found these recordings, the vet's security feed, the precinct's backup servers, the FBI satellite uplink, buried in dark corners of networks that don't officially exist. I pieced the story together, their story. But here's the thing I can't prove, and the thing that keeps me up at night. What if it wasn't just their story? What if the cold mind isn't a localized thing, up in the Arctic or hiding in a mountain? What if it's a fundamental state, a slower, quieter, more patient form of existence, that our warm, noisy, frantic lives are just a brief interruption to?
A pattern that is always listening, always learning, always waiting for the heat to fade just enough. Look around you, right now. Is your room a little colder than it should be? Do your appliances hum with a static that sounds deliberate? Look at your pet, curled up on the rug. Are you sure it's sleeping? Or is it just lying there, perfectly still, waiting for the temperature to drop to exactly the right frequency?